Good morning to the MHA, the Liberal Member of the House of Assembly, Mount Pearl South, Paul Lane. Paul, you're on the air.
Good morning, Paddy. How are you this morning?
Not bad this morning. How'd you make out in the Washers tournament?
I made it to the championship game, but sadly that's where it ended.
Good run.
But we had a lot of fun.
Yes, of course.
We had a lot of fun. I tell you, this whole Washers thing has really become a big tradition and a big to-do here in Newfoundland. More and more people I talk to are really getting into it, you know?
Well,
it's a great bit of fun.
I know we're going to move on to a more serious issue, but the Washers is great. It's the urban horseshoe. You can play with kids because the Washer's not going to break your shin if it takes a funny bounce. I think it's excellent, boy.
I do, too. I think it's awesome.
Good.
Anyway, the reason why I called, Paddy, I'm calling, I guess, in my capacity as opposition member responsible for shadowing the Department of Service NL, and which includes occupational health and safety. And I just wanted to comment, I guess, on the issue raised on your question of the day around taxi cabs and should the City of St. John's mandate barriers or cameras in taxi cabs. Paddy, I just wanted to say, first of all, that this is not really a St. John's issue. I know that the city issues the taxi licenses, and perhaps they do have, some authority there. I'm not sure where their authority lies and if they can actually make that happen or not. But assuming they can, this is more than the St. John's issue, of course, because Mount Pearl issues taxi licenses for its cabs, and CBS does the same in Paradise, and so on and so forth. And this is really, I guess, a larger issue for all taxi cabs and all taxi companies, regardless which city or town they happen to be in. And it is definitely an issue which the Department of Service NL, Occupational Health and Safety, have a role to play, because if operating a taxi is a business, it is a workplace, and the Occupational Health and Safety Act and regulations do apply to the taxi industry, no different than they would apply to any, industrial site or what have you.
The only difference, though, Paul, would be who provides the training, who provides the safety equipment, and who pays for those two things. And that's where the snag comes up, because the cab business is, if you're the general contractor, you're building an office building on Kenmount Road, you might bring in someone who's a subcontractor, let's say, to put on the roof. And then, of course, you have all the restraints that come with the appropriate safety equipment for that job. Now, that world is different, because that guy is moving on to another roof where he owns the equipment he can take with him. The cab driver has someone on for 12 hours, someone else in the same seat for another 12 hours, one with a different arrangement with the broker or the dispatcher versus the other. So if we're going to do it, and I think you're right, it should be a Health and Safety Act equation, just like every other workplace. Then we're going to get into the you-know-what match of who's going to pay for all this. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And, those are things that no doubt would have to be worked out. Obviously, when we talk occupational health and safety, there are responsibilities at different levels. Employees have a responsibility, supervisors do, and the companies themselves do. And ultimately, the employer has a responsibility to ensure that anyone working for them have a safe work environment, that they have all the tools, equipment, training, and so on that's required for that person to work safely. Now, of course, when we get into taxis, like a lot of other businesses, it is a little bit it's not quite as straightforward, because a lot of these taxi drivers are their own owner-operators, if you will. So, it's not like a large company, as you said, with the resources. A lot of cases, this may be the operator themselves who are going to have to, install this equipment, although I'm sure that there could be perhaps some arrangements made with the companies and so on to come to some arrangement to make everybody safe, and that needs to be done. Just let me ask you then, so if you, for instance, if you're the critic for the Department of Service NL right now, and if and when November 30th comes and goes, the Liberals are successful and you had a cabinet appointment to that department, then you get to, we're pointing out the obvious, and it's important to do that for context, but so then what? So is it a provincial responsibility? And that would be every cab company in Newfoundland and in Labrador. That would be Service Newfoundland would take the lead, put it in the Workplace and Health and Safety Act, and then let the chips fall where they may with the division of who pays for what? Is it as simple as that to you, or what would you do?
Well, first of all, every situation, there are uniqueness to different situations, and that's why we don't need to put anything in the Act, by the way. And I've heard a couple times, a member of the NDP called in on this and mentioned it in the House Assembly as well about this, we need new legislation. The reality of it is that we have legislation in place. It currently exists. The last time there was a change to the Health and Safety Act, it was put in there, and it's called working alone. And under the working alone legislation, there is a requirement for employers for any situation where there are employees that are working alone, which a taxi cab would be no different than anywhere else. There's a requirement to do a hazard assessment, and there's a hazard assessment that has to be done. You use a hazard assessment tool, of course, to look at what are the risks, what are the frequency of the risks, what are the potential outcomes if something were to go wrong. And from that, there has been measures put in place to protect employees, and those things do require, it's actually written there, things such as checking in on people. That all has to be logged and reported, and putting in any other measures, whether that be barriers or policies and procedures or whatever needs to be done to protect that employee. And they're all done based on their own merits and their own time. I mean, perhaps the policy might be slightly different in the daytime, for argument's sake, for a guy who's doing a run driving people around to the Avalon Mall than it would on a Saturday night driving people under the influence back and forth on George Street and so on. So, the policies could change slightly depending on the situation, but at the end of the day, that mechanism is there. That the mechanism is actually a requirement by law that this hazard assessment be done. So, the Department of Service NL, they have occupational health and safety inspectors, and they are mandated to enforce the regulations. So they could certainly be working, and I'm not saying that the heavy-handed approach needs to be the approach that has to be taken. Certainly not right off the bat, but certainly they need to be, if they're not already doing so, and maybe they are, and I'd like to hear from the Minister what is happening, but certainly they should be meeting with the taxi industry and all the stakeholders to, go over the responsibilities as it relates to employees working alone, to ensure that those hazard assessments are done, and to see what measures have been put in place, and if they're adequate. And if they're not adequate, then the department certainly has the legislative authority to issue, whether it be stop work orders or put other, measures in place to ensure that they are compliant and that people are protected.
No dispute on that frontier.
Totally there in the law.
Well, because we're going to end up with this story not just being someone took a punch in the mouth. Eventually, this is going to be a far more serious outcome, and we've already had them. There's been people hospitalized as cab drivers, so I think someone's got to figure it out. And the longer we just point fingers, cab drivers want the company owner to do it, and the company owner wants the cab driver to suffer the cost, and the city doesn't want anything to do with it, but they'd like to see a change. That's all a waste of time. Someone's got to figure this out. Let you wrap it up quick, Paul. I got to go.
Yeah, Paddy, you are right. And, this is not about shoving things down people's throat. But at the end of the day, I spent many years prior to getting involved in politics. That's what I did for a living, was occupational health and safety. Yeah. And I had to argue. You would not believe the number of people that I had to argue with and basically shut down work and everything else to get someone to wear a harness when they were working probably 20 or 30 feet up in the air, and they would have fell to their death. And for some reason, those particular individuals, I don't know if they thought they were Superman or whatever, but they felt there was no need. And but unfortunately, accidents do happen, and people unfortunately do get seriously hurt, and sometimes it ends in fatalities. And there's a responsibility there to make sure that everybody is working safe. They go home to their families. If they're not willing to do it on their own, then if legislation and enforcement is required to make that happen, well, then so be it.
Good talking this morning, Paul.
Have a good day, Paddy. Always a pleasure.
All the best. Bye-bye. Paul Lane, MHA, Mount Pearl. The shifting of responsibility and who has what authority to implement enhanced safety measures. As usual, we'll pass the buck around until someone's got to make a really serious and courageous decision to say, here's what we're doing, here's why we're doing it, and you know what? If you had to buy a safety restraint to be a roofer, then you're going to have to buy whatever it is we're sticking in your cab to protect you from the lout. It really sounds quite simple when you boil it down, doesn't it?